Well, hey everybody, welcome to .NET Rocks, the internet audio talk show for .NET developers. In New London, Connecticut, this is Carl Franklin.
And hey, this is Mark Dunn in Atlanta, Georgia.
What's up, Mark?
Hey, not much, Carl. How are you doing?
So this is Tornado Day, or yesterday was Tornado Day, where there was something like 24 tornadoes that touched down at different places in the United States. And I was just reading and looking at the news, and they're all headed towards you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, since I'm like, a complete geek. I don't really do anything except sit in front of my computer all day long, so I don't watch the news. I was completely unaware that, I'm the target of many tornadoes.
Basically, the cold air came down from Canada, and the warm air came up from the Gulf Stream, and they sort of met in the middle and exploded. And tornadoes went everywhere, and about 25 people, as of this recording, have been killed all over the United States. There was a whole bunch that sprouted in that whole sort of southeastern corridor going up as far as Pennsylvania. And so now they're pushing down to the southwest, and it's going to go right through Georgia. In fact, it's probably in Georgia right now as we speak.
Well, yeah, if I go off the air abruptly, you'll know the reason.
Well, anyway, this is the first show that we've done since the Dev Connection show, which I just loved. I think the whole thing was great. We went down there, we set up the microphones, we talked to all these people, and it was a great show, wasn't it?
Yeah, man, that was awesome. I really enjoyed it. It's like a big family reunion. We kind of see the same faces there as far as speakers, and it's wonderful to get together with those guys.
Oh, it's awesome. There's people that I never see except for when I go do shows, and they're like old friends.
Yeah, I got to meet Inga Rammer while I was down in Orlando. That was incredible.
Yeah, we've been
He's
talking about it.
He's a younger guy than I ever figured.
He has 22 or 23.
Yeah, he's a kid, a mere baby.
I asked him if he'd ever written any other books. He said, no, this is my first. That was an amazing
what a great book to come out the gate with.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I mean, I still think he has the definitive book on .NET remoting.
Well, everybody seems to think that. Although there are lots of other books on it, he sort of takes it down to a level, like Billy Hollis said, where very few people are going to go. So while we were down at the show, I got this email from the regional director list about the Pet Shop 2 version 2. And we've been talking about this Pet Shop application ever since the very first episode when Pat Hines talked about it. And so basically what happened is the Java community went back and did a new version of it. And the best they could come up with is not even half as fast as .NET.
That certainly looks good for .NET.
Yeah. So and now, of course, they're crying foul, and because they're saying that it wasn't optimized for performance, but that was the whole point of the Pet Shop thing to begin with. And so
So they're saying that the version that they did in J2EE was not optimized for performance.
That's right. And also they used technologies. They picked technologies that weren't optimized for performance. But I thought that was the point of the whole Pet Shop application, was to show how much faster and more scalable .NET is than J2EE.
Yeah, I thought the same thing,
Well, anyway, maybe our guest tonight will have something to say about that. What can I say about our guest? He's a superstar. He's a developmentor, trainer, and author, and he has a .NET website or two. I guess you could say that.
Yeah, he's like the Elvis in the technical community.
Yeah, he really is. I'm looking at the list he sent me of all of his websites that all start with www.sellsbrothers.com. Would you please welcome to the show again, this time as a guest, not as a caller, Chris Sells.
Hi, guys.
What's up?
Hey, Chris. What's up, man?
Oh, well, I'm just happy to be in Oregon, where no tornadoes ever touch down, because I'm originally from Minnesota, where we have more than our share.
Yeah, so I've never been to Oregon. I mean, what's Oregon like?
Oregon is covered with 50% trees. Actually, it's 51, and they have all kinds of state laws in place to make sure that that's exactly what happens. And it's gorgeous. When it's not raining, it is just the most wonderful weather you can imagine. It is always mild. In the summer, it never gets too hot. It never gets humid. There's no bugs. The worst thing in the summer you have to worry about in Oregon is slugs, and they almost never make it over the doorway. So, you know, it's not like bugs where you have to screen yourself in. Being from Minnesota, you know, the whole bug thing and the heat and the humidity. So Oregon is wonderful.
Mark, you don't have any bugs in Atlanta, do you?
Well, you know, we only use bugs as a way to get around down here. You know, they're big. Mosquitoes are bigger than you can imagine.
Well, I like there's something I like to say to my Midwest friends when I go home for the summer. I like to tell the story about how, so far after 10 years of in Oregon, I still haven't killed as many mosquitoes as I would routinely kill in one swat in Minnesota.
Yeah, we do have some bugs down here in the South.
Isn't the mosquito the state bird of Minnesota?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Minnesota is the land of 10,000 mosquito pools.
So what made you decide to leave Minnesota?
Well, yeah, you know, I was up there on the Iron Range, you know, and, you know, I got a call from Andy Grove at Intel, and he said, gosh, I know you spend all your time in the evenings with your Macintosh at home, on Unix at work, and so we've got the worst of both for you. We've got Windows 3.1. Come on down and program that for us. And that's what I did.
Well, and the rest is history. So
and
actually,
then it got a lot better with Windows 95, and it's been getting steadily better ever since up until they got it right with Windows 2000 and even more right with XP.
So tell me your history since Intel.
So I was at Intel for 2.5 years, which is all I could stand. It's a giant bureaucratic company, right? And I'm just not that kind of guy. I have worked at big companies, I've worked at small companies, I've worked at startups, and I've found out that I have a personality that is uniquely suited to a company of exactly one.
Yeah.
I'm not in charge of anyone. No one's in charge of me. I just work with my friends, and it works out really well.
So what happened then?
So after 2.5 years at Intel, I went to a course at a local, like an extension course. It was a 5-day short course. And they were giving a course on this new technology called Olay. And I saw that they had already had one, and I missed it. So I sent the organizer an email, and I said, gosh, I'd really like to take your next Olay course. And they said, well, we don't have one scheduled, but if you want to get, you know, some of your friends together, we need this many people, and we'll set up a course for you. So I spammed all of Intel Oregon, something like, you know, 15,000 employees at the time, and said, you know, I need some people to come to a class with me. And about 20 of us went, and it turns out that we went to the second ever teaching of Don Box giving Essential Olay.
Wow.
Which eventually became Essential Com.
Right.
And Monday at lunch, Don was telling an interview story. And even then, right, he wasn't famous, but he was still so charismatic that he was just holding court at lunchtime, and everyone was just crowded around him. And he was telling a story about how he has a weed-out question, a specific question that he asks all interview candidates. And, in fact, this question was asked of all Developmentor instructors for about 5 years. And he would ask them this just as a weed-out question. And he told us about the question, and it was something very obscure and C++ specific, and it wasn't so much that he wanted the details of how it worked. He wanted the details of why it was that way. And I couldn't help myself. I'm just a type A+ personality. He was asking the questions.
Yeah.
And the guy on the other end couldn't answer the phone, or he was telling the story about how the guy on the other end couldn't answer the questions. So I just popped out the answers. And after doing that a couple of times, he looked at me and he said, do you want to work for me? And by that evening, since I'd organized the course and he was up in California all by himself, I felt obligated to, you know, entertain the guy. So I brought him to dinner downtown Portland, and we went to the giant City of Books in Portland. We hung out, and by the end of the evening, he was interviewing me for an instructor position. At the end of the week,
what year was this, Chris?
What's this?
What year was this?
This was the end of 1994.
So he was in 1994. He was teaching. He had Developmentor going, or
yes, in fact, for a year.
Cool.
So many instructors were on staff when you joined, Chris?
I think I was something like employee number 12.
Wow. So you've seen a lot develop there.
I've seen a lot of development at Developmentor. Yes.
Yeah. So the Developmentor really was built around Don, was it not? And
actually, the Developmentor was built around two people, Don and Mike Abercrombie. And he ran all the business stuff, and he said, Don, go and build the technical staff. Build whatever you want. Build the right stuff. Build it well.
Mm-hmm.
Give it to us, and we will sell the hell out of it. And that's
Great.
where Developmentor came from.
So I guess the primary market, or if you will, the average programmer that would go to a Developmentor class for a long time was a C++ developer, right?
Actually, yes. I mean, that is absolutely true. Whether it was classic C++, Win32, COM, OLE, HEL, MFC. But we've always had, almost since day one, a Visual Basic curriculum as well.
This is a good time to bring up a point for the listener, is that, obviously Developmentor and Franklin's Net, we're sort of competitors in the VBNet training area, but even though that's true, we certainly don't have any issues with that, or it's not going to prevent us from talking about anything, because we certainly have a lot of respect for each other as developers and trainers.
In fact, we could compare salaries if you like.
Yeah, we certainly could.
Okay.
So tell me about, just pick one of the websites that you do that you'd like to talk about.
Well, I pretty much just have the one website. I just sent you individual, sub-URLs from those websites. Salesbrothers.com is the main homepage, and for a long time I was doing so many different things, and people were having such a hard time finding this stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, they would ask me a question at a conference, and I would say that the answer is on my website, and here's where it is. And they'd say, "Oh, I love your website. I've been to this part or that part, but I didn't know there was other parts."
Well, let me ask you this. I see from the list, I'm looking at 4 pages that basically are similar. You have Windows Developer News, then the Cells Spout, which I imagine is like a blog or something, and Cells Brothers News, and then Chris Cells on .NET. I mean, what's the difference between all those
Sure,
things?
not a problem. So the first one you mentioned was Windows Developer News?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Windows Developer News is it's my own little Slashdot-like public posting place for Windows developers.
Okay.
There's one for the Macintosh guys. There's one for the Linux guys. But
so you're still a Mac guy?
No, I haven't been a Mac guy for a long time.
Okay.
You got help at some point.
You solved a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't until the recent release of the Mac OS, and I do mean like the .2 release, that it was a real OS that I could actually use.
Right, because it's based on FreeBSD, right?
It is, yes.
Yep.
So anyway, Windows Developer News is just a little place where I post the things that I see in the community that I consider interesting.
Okay.
As I surf around and get my emails or whatever. It's also the place where I post what I'm doing, that day on my website. So when I do something interesting on my website, or that I consider interesting, I also post it at the very front.
So you have the Cells cam, it follows you into the bathroom and stuff. We're going to see you on Fox.
I don't. I'm one of those big, funny-looking geeks that you really don't want to look at too closely. So the idea there, and people can post their own stuff, and they do.
Right.
People post their own news articles there, and it's all exposed via an RSS feed. So that people can just, if they like RSS, it'll just notify them when something interesting happens.
So I have to be the acronym police and ask you to define RSS.
It stands for.
Even if we don't know what it stands for.
The word syndicated is in there somewhere.
And what is it?
Okay, so what it is it's a little hunk of XML that describes new things that have happened on your website. That's exactly what it was built for. And it's just a bunch of bloggers use it to say, here's my current thoughts. A bunch of news services all over the world, thousands, use it to publish their news. For example, I'm subscribed to like a couple of BBC RSS feeds.
So it's a standard way somebody can go to your website and download a file, and they know exactly what format it's in.
Well, essentially what you do, it's an RSS feed, which means it's a specific XML format, and what you do is you feed the URL of it into an RSS reader, just like a news reader or a mail reader.
Yeah.
And it will pull it on a periodic basis looking for new things since the last time it looked.
Great.
So RSS is a pretty cool way to keep up on news in various areas, and I just expose that from my website for the Windows developers.
So what about the Cells Spout?
Now, the Cells Spout I invented because I had a bunch of stuff to say that had no technical merit whatsoever. Just crap I wanted to say that day. I had an epiphany. I thought something was cool or stupid or fun or whatever, and I just couldn't not write it. I'm afflicted with a common affliction amongst authors because probably don't know this. There's very little money in book writing or article writing. It's mostly to help, people know who you are. My friend used to say, my friend Dan Weston, who encouraged me to write my first book, said, a book is like a 400-page resume.
I especially like never send an email in anger. That was one of the best ones there.
But which has no technical merit whatsoever. It's just
so
a hard
true, though.
lesson.
It's a valuable lesson.
Yes, totally. And I still want to see that UI built for Outlook. Save career, ruin career.
That's right.
Hey, Chris, you mentioned the weed out question that Don Box had. You also have a collection of questions that Microsoft uses for interviews, don't you?
I do, yes.
Now, I thought that was very interesting. What's your favorite one of those?
Actually, my favorite one is the very first one on the list, and it will always be the first one because it's the first one I heard. And I heard it at my interview later that same week of Essential Olay, asked by Don. And he had just been up at Microsoft hanging out with his new Microsoft friends because he was one of the few people on the planet that could understand the value of Common Olay at that point. And Sarah Williams told him an interview question that she uses in her interviews. And it's probably the most famous Microsoft interview question there is. And we got to the end of the interview, and he said, "Yeah, you got the job, not a problem. The interview is over. This will not be used to judge you. But let me ask you this Microsoft interview question." What he said was, "Why are manhole covers round?" And I looked at him, and I blinked, and then I said, "Well, tell you what, I will answer that question if you answer this one for me." And he said, "Sure, go ahead." I said, "Why do firemen wear red suspenders?"
Yeah, to keep their pants up.
And he looked at me and went, I don't know. And that has been my attitude of those silly riddle questions.
It's like a Zen koan. It's like, come on.
So ever since then, I've kind of collected them. And it started literally with that one question, and then I heard a couple more. I asked around. And I put 6 of them up on my website. 6. I don't know how many there are up there now, but it's probably close to 100.
So is there any answer to the manhole question?
There is. There's several. My most favorite answer, this is the famous answer, is a manhole cover is round because the hole is round.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you made it square, it'd be possible to drop it into the hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the more logical answer, and a very good one. And another good one is because they're damn heavy, and it's a lot easier to roll them than it is to carry them.
Yeah. So what is the value of Common Olay anyway? No, that's okay. We won't get on that.
Well, I'm more wondering why firemen wear red suspenders.
It's to keep their pants up. That's the answer to that one. That's like how many 6-cent stamps in a dozen?
Yes, exactly. 2, right?
Right. Okay, so let's move on to Sells Brothers News.
Okay, so Sells Brothers News is just a newsletter for people that don't even want to surf to my website. They don't have RSS, but they would still like to know what goes on the website. So
Okay.
I just send that out every couple of weeks to voluntary subscribers that want to know what's going on my site.
Okay. And so that's your basic newsletter.
That's
Here's
just
what
a
I'm
basic
doing.
newsletter.
And Chris Sells on .net is obviously more technical, or?
Actually, so the stuff I post on my website could hardly get more technical in most cases. I'm a pretty technical guy, but the format of the newsletters are very different. And who owns them? I run my own newsletter, which is just like 5 things, the top 5 things that happened or that happened to the website in the last 2 weeks. Here's 3 sentences and a link if you care. Right? The goal is to have the whole email in like 1 page. So you can say if there's anything useful in it or not right away.
Yeah.
But the other newsletter is from Windows Developer Magazine, and they came to me and said, "We'd love it if you would do a newsletter for us," and it would be just content, and they sent it out every other week, and it's just 500 words of an actual article. So the content is actually part of the newsletter, as opposed with mine, it's just links.
Okay. Well, actually, I have a question to kick this off, and it concerns COM. And I know that's what you guys do a lot of, or have a lot of knowledge in.
Yeah, I used to. I gave it up.
Right. Gave it up for Lent?
I did, and that and Catholicism, but yes.
So my question has to do with COM, and specifically, like, why COM objects take so long to be created and destroyed, and as relative to .NET objects, and we heard Mark Anders say, .NET objects are much, 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 much lighter than well, I want to know how much, and I want some numbers that I can tell my students. Four is the number. 42?
Yeah, I mean.
For what?
That's interesting. I mean, yes, the reason that COM objects are bigger is because they have to implement a ton of stuff themselves. For example, a COM server is about 1,000 lines of code before you get anything done. Literally, in terms of self-registration, in terms of just exposing the right APIs to the operating system, in terms of exposing the right objects, the class factory objects, and the reference counting. All of that stuff has to be done in each and every COM server.
COM server meaning a COM EXE
a DLL
or DLL?
Or an EXE.
ELL
right.
or EXE, yeah.
Because the COM protocol is so lightweight, all it says is an interface is a pointer to a table of pointers. The rest is up to the implementer.
Okay.
And ATL and MFC and Visual Basic all make that, pretty.
Now, you're in an ASP page, and you say, create object, my class. What happens at that point?
So what happens there, if you call co-create instance, or, the Visual Basic equivalent, which is create object.
Right.
What it does is it takes the information you give it.
The class name.
So, for example, in Visual Basic, it takes Microsoft.Excel.
Yeah.
Right. What it does is it takes that, that's called a programmatic ID or a prog ID in the trade, and we go and look that up in a specific place in the registry, HCLE class's root.
Now that look at up in the registry, I mean, if you break that down for me, that's a slow process, isn't it?
That's loading
enormous
a database
text
in a
database.
Memory.
Yeah.
It's a very primitive database too.
Yeah.
Essentially, they tried to build the lightest weight database they could.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a bunch of caching to make sure that the second time you look in this certain area in the registry, that it's faster.
Right.
But then, caching leads to...
but all you have to do to figure that out is pull up regedit and search for something, and oh my God, you're there for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so you're going through iDispatch interfaces when you do what you're describing?
Okay, so I haven't even got to what interfaces on the COM object yet. All I've gotten to is we go and look in a well-known place in the registry and say, this prog ID maps to this class ID, which is just a 128-bit unique number.
A GUID.
A GUID.
Yeah.
Absolutely. GUID is, the East Coast pronunciation.
GUID, like Druid.
On the West Coast we say GUID.
A Druid GUID.
Yeah. So we take that GUID and we go to another COM API called co-create instance, which takes the GUID, goes back to the registry, and says, okay, for this class ID, what's the DLL or the XE that goes along with the server?
Another search.
Yes. And then once we find the DLL, it's most often a DLL.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing like Olay embedded GU. It will call load library on that DLL, bring it into memory. It'll call get proc address, calling DLL get class object. It will call the entry point, and this is where we cross the boundary into the server. All the DLL or all the runtime, the COM runtime, if you will, has done is load the DLL in the memory and call an API. The rest is all done by the server, including all the code needed to put all those keys in the registry for the COM runtime to find it in the first place.
Yeah. So that's when we talk about plumbing code. VB programmers have been pretty much shielded from the COM plumbing, but C++ programmers didn't have it so lucky, did they?
Oh, in fact, C++ programmers, to be successful, had to view it as evil that plumbing code was hidden from them.
Right.
Certain C++ libraries tried to hide it from them, and the problem is that so little is provided by the operating system that it's inevitable that you have to dig into the lowest depths of that stuff almost on every project.
So like the C++ programmer coming of age, if you will, in the day of Windows 95 had a much, much more daunting task in front of them to do COM than a C# programmer now doing .NET, did they not?
Oh my God. I mean, night and day.
Yeah.
You could easily compare it to the C programmer and the ASM programmer. I mean,
Yeah.
it was that much difference.
ASM assembler.
Yeah, I mean, in those days, you had to program C++ so flawlessly,
Right.
That even if it compiled, you only had a 50-50 chance it might actually work.
Well, Mark, I think
Whereas now, with .NET, you could fall on a keyboard and get syntactically correct C# code.
Well, Mark, this explains our thing about, we've been on a harangue against case sensitivity or insensitivity and case sensitivity in C#.
Hey.
And my question is, if that wasn't there, would C++ programmers not think this is a real language?
Well, it turns out that, I'm hardly unbiased, right? I'm an old-time C and C++
But you're
programmer,
also a VB guy.
and now a C# programmer.
Yeah.
I know VB, but I'm a C# guy.
Okay.
And, it turns out that case sensitivity is the new Hungarian notation. You guys
Okay.
ever...
Right. So if you do a private variable, you're going to camel case it, something like that?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, private variables or local variables are going to be the lowercase name of something.
Right.
And the question is what? Now, C++ programmers aren't used to typing very much. When compared to VB programmers, you write a novel, right, every time you sit down.
Excuse me? C++ programmers don't write very much code?
Oh, no. Well, they spend all their time writing classes so that they don't have to write very much code.
Last time I checked, Chris, a class was code.
Yes, I know, but if you look at what it takes to write a class versus what it takes to write a Visual Basic class...
So you're saying that, wait a minute now, C++ programmers write less code than VB programmers? I want to know how you figure that, but first, Chris, if you guys don't mind, let's take a pause and pay the bills. Hey, listen up now. I want to tell you about the Windows Developer Network online at windevnet.com. This is a portal and a single point of access for Windows and .NET developers looking for timely and technical Windows coverage. The content comes from a variety of leading programming publications, such as Windows Developer Magazine, Dr. Dobbs Journal, Software Development Magazine, C and C++ Users Journal, New Architect, and more. So up there you're going to find articles, book reviews, audio and video streaming media seminars, interviews and presentations, and it's really exciting. This site has generated a lot of attention, lots of positive comments, and there's currently about 6,200 registered users, so definitely check out the Windows Developer Network at windevnet.com. Now let's get back to our interview with Chris Sells here on .NET Rocks. Okay, we're back on .NET Rocks, and we're talking with Chris Sells from Developmentor and sellsbrothers.com. Before the break, we were talking about C++ programmers, and Chris, you said that C++ programmers actually write less code than VB programmers. You can't mean that.
Oh, no.
Okay.
They think they write less code.
Okay.
Right? Because Visual Basic has 90% of what you need to build most stuff in it already.
Right. They
So
mastered the art of the black
more
box.
verbose, on a per-class basis, who cares? You only have to write 3 of them.
Right.
Whereas C++ programmers have almost nothing.
Right. Clean slate.
And they have to write hundreds of classes to get anything useful done. But each individual class looks smaller, and therefore they feel superior.
Well, I'm glad someone finally explained it so even I can understand it.
Yes, the C++ programmers are very elitist, and
Yes.
they have a very specific psychology, which I've studied for a long time.
I think I would have a great sense of accomplishment if I went through all that bullshit just and was able to come out with code that didn't crash.
Oh, it's not a matter of accomplishment. These guys are elitists. If they can actually write working code, they think they're gods on Earth. Sorry, if we get to actually write working code in C++, we think we're gods on Earth.
So you're an
I am
elitist as
absolutely a
well.
member of that.
So you're an admitted elitist as well.
Oh, very much. And in fact, my whole website is littered with, hey, look at this cool thing. I was able to actually make it work.
Right. Well, hey, Chris, do you think do C++ developers have kind of a harder road to go down than maybe a Java guy does, just because they're not able to do things at the level they're used to?
Actually, I think that C++ programmers have a harder time because they're able to do things at a level several times higher than they're used to.
Yeah.
They're more productive, and this is a problem for them.
They don't trust it, really.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're shipping code in 2 weeks and thinking it can't be right.
Yes, and that's the thing, right? I mean, if you type all those news and you don't type any deletes, that just seems suspicious, don't you think?
And that brings me around to a good topic, which is the garbage collector. VB programmers, they've been shielded from this whole idea of garbage collection. Geez, ever since Quick Basic. I mean,
I would disagree.
We've never had to. Well, okay, except for setting forms to nothing and all that.
But here's the funny thing: you do that, and somebody sits down, and an expensive consultant says, "Oh, you forgot to do that." When you have like the application fall over because it's not releasing any of its memory.
Okay, but
you never know why.
I understand what you're saying, but in general, to get a Hello World program working, the user, we can create a string. I'm talking about primitives here. We can create a string. We can set it to something. We can use it, and then we don't have to worry about anything that happens after that. Whereas the C++ programmer, and even C programmers before them, have always had to deallocate memory.
Actually, C++ and C programmers had 2 places to put memory.
Yeah.
And Visual Basic programmers only had to have 1.
Right.
And in fact, the memory was in very different places. Well, in very similar places in between Visual Basic 6 and VB.NET.
Yeah.
But how it was managed by the underlying operating system is vastly different.
Right. So coming around to my question about garbage collecting, it's the whole point of the dispose method and the finalizer being expensive and what the heck can I do? I've taught people the standard stuff that I believe is right, and there just doesn't seem to be any easy solutions to forcing garbage collection to happen. And making sure that something is cleaned up so we can reuse the variable. And I know that this is an issue for you because you're actually trying to put reference counting back into the framework. So why don't you just explain that whole situation for the listener?
How much of this story do you want? I have a long history with this.
I want to hear it. I want to hear the story. I think this is
give it to us, Chris. Give it to us.
I think
all right,
this
you
is
can edit it out later, but here's the story.
Yeah.
So about 97, 98, when COM was suddenly becoming popular, there was this thing called HEL, which I had kind of left out of my memory altogether because I was spending my time reading Java in a Nutshell from O'Reilly & Associates. I was going to be Developmentor's first Java instructor. Now, before then, I had been done years, like 6-7 years of C++, and it was just ingrained in my pores. I oozed C++ syntax when I sweat. And so I'm reading this book about Java, and I get to the section that says, there's this thing called a finalizer, which is where you put cleanup code for your object, but it's not guaranteed to be called. And I thought, what? Because in C++, I have something called a destructor that is where I put cleanup code for my object, but it is guaranteed to be called, and I even know exactly when it will be called. So it's deterministic. I know exactly when that function will be called. Whereas in Java, suddenly, I have this function, and I didn't even know if it would be called, let alone when. And so I didn't have the terms then, but the schism between deterministic and non-deterministic finalization was born. And I couldn't get over it. I checked the spec. The spec agreed. There was a little function where you could actually request that the garbage collector someday maybe think about maybe collecting garbage, but that was the best you could do in Java. And I stopped. I was not Developmentor's first Java instructor. I couldn't face it. I went and spent 3 years doing HCL, and I was very happy.
And .NET's no different.
.NET is no different than Java was when it comes to, well, actually that's not true. It has the same basic mechanism, which is it has a function, a virtual function in the object-based class called finalize. And you can provide an implementation of it, although it looks like a destructor in C#, which just bothers me no end because it isn't. Right? It's this finalizer. Now in .NET, at least in C#, you get a guarantee that says this finalizer will be called as the app domain is shut down in .NET.
However, you can't specifically shut down the app domain.
Oh, that's not true. I mean, when you're, for example, if you exit all the threads in an app domain, or the last thread, or the main thread in the app domain, or whatever, right? I mean,
Oh, okay.
yeah. I mean,
right.
essentially when the process shuts down, your cleanup code will be executed.
Well, that's true, but what I meant was,
But
forcing garbage collecting with a GC collect doesn't necessarily guarantee that that's going to...
Actually, you're right. You have to do two things to force your finalizers to be called. You have to first say collect, which goes through and says, okay, all of these guys, you over there, you're happy, you don't have finalizers, we'll take your memory and you'll be fine. All you guys, your second-class citizens, you have finalizers, you go over there and wait your turn for the background thread to come and call you.
Yeah.
And someday it will. So, and you can force that with another call in the GC called wait for finalization, I believe is the name of the API, which will actually run through that queue and call all the finalizers. But you should never call either of those functions.
Right.
Never, never, never.
Right.
Well, what's your thoughts about implementing iDisposable and creating a dispose method and calling GC suppress finalize?
So the Java so what happened was I noticed this in .NET. Now, I could see the writing on the wall, right? I could avoid Java because it wasn't Windows, right? It wasn't Microsoft. I could go and do COM and ACL and be happy. But I saw .NET and I said, this is the thing that I will be spending the next 5 years of my life on. I better make some peace with this finalization thing. So at an early design preview at Microsoft, I raised my hand and said, yeah, what about this resource management thing? There's this issue with non-deterministic finalization. And they looked at me and they said, yeah, that's the way the Java guys do it. Shut up. That's the way we're going to do it. Because 5 years of research on Java says that that's okay. Nobody has any problems. Of course, they did. They just didn't know.
Question, but let me interrupt you here. Why wouldn't it be okay to implement either way? So we could implement a method that would be lightweight, that would absolutely guarantee that data is destroyed. After all, memory is memory, and the garbage collector is going to get around to it anyway. Why not have the option?
The option of?
The option of destroying an object like a traditional destructor, or letting the garbage collector do it.
So it turns out that for memory-rich systems, which is what we're building today, right, with the cost of memory so low, we're building memory-rich systems that have so much memory that we can actually improve the performance of the application considerably by batching calls to free memory. Instead of, because in the unmanaged world in C++ and in COM, every time that object was no longer used, bam, the finalizer, the COM finalizer was called, which was great because you could close sockets and close file handles and close database connections immediately, which was good because those were precious resources. But it would also return the memory. And what happened is you had all kinds of, it took time to put that memory back. And you had fragmented memory, which means it took time now to find memory.
Yeah.
Whereas in .NET, what happens is finding memory is just going to the end of the heap and saying, oh, here you go, here's some bytes.
Right.
There's no finding of holes. There aren't any holes.
Right.
Because when we do a garbage collect, the garbage collector goes through, finds all the holes, and removes them by changing the pointers to the objects to point at new memory so that there's no holes. Right, which makes things so much faster.
Yeah.
Right, so from a memory standpoint, the reference tracking garbage collection, that's what it's called, reference tracking garbage collection, is exactly what you want. And for a lot of systems, it works really well. The downside is because we don't collect that memory, there's no time to actually call the finalizer in a deterministic fashion.
And
the
that's
problem
why
there is, you're creating file objects, you're creating database objects. These guys have real resources in the system.
Yeah.
They have, and there's only a limited number of them. There's only a limited number of file handles. There's only a limited number of sockets or database connections, especially database connections. That's a big deal.
Is this why, like, when you use a socket, which is a topic near and dear to my heart, when you use a socket and you shut it down both ways and then close it, and then try to create a new socket in that variable, sometimes you'll have residual problems? Actually,
I've never seen that, so I would be interesting.
Okay.
I do know this. If you don't properly shut down the socket, and the problem with sockets and files in general, is you have sockets and socket readers.
Yes.
And files and file readers.
Yeah.
And they both have close functions.
Right.
And when do you call what?
Right.
And How do you know that you've really closed the thing you're actually interested in closing?
I close them in the reverse order I opened them in. I pray to God that that's the right way.
That should be safe.
Yeah.
That should be safe. So the general problem isn't memory. Memory is cheap. The way the garbage collector works for
Right.
memory is exactly perfect. However, it's doing the exact wrong thing for each and every other resource.
So why are finalizers so expensive, and how expensive are they to implement, and why?
So the reason finalizers are expensive is because when compared to just moving some memory around or checking if memory is used and freeing it in big chunks, calling individual member functions and waiting for the finalization to happen, that's expensive. And in fact,
Okay.
the garbage collector will only give you a certain amount of time before it whacks your finalization method.
So right, so there's no guarantee that a finalizer's code will finish.
That's correct.
Yeah.
You have to be quick.
Right.
But mostly what you want to do is just close the dang file,
Yeah.
right? So it's not generally a problem.
So of course, I'm still wanting you to talk about dispose methods. You
Right.
know, what's your 2 cents on that?
Sure. So, sorry, like I say, this is a long story. So the basic problem is that the memory is managed properly, but every other resource is managed badly, and there's no way for the object to know when the last client has said, I don't need you anymore. Okay. Like in the COM world, there was reference counts, and as soon as that reference count went to 0, bango, we knew nobody was using us anymore, and we could flush all our resources. So we don't have that in .NET. So what we needed, and I complained loudly eventually, and they heard, and I said, we need something, because every object in the world is going to have a close, it's going to have a dispose, it's going to have this function, and I got to write client code, and I have to be a programmer, I have to know what this object's close method's called, right? I have to write client code to remember to call all that stuff. Could you please add reference counting? And they said, no, it's too expensive. But we will standardize the protocol for you. So you always know what the name of the function is to call. And they put that standardization of that protocol into an interface called iDisposable.
So are you telling me that you're responsible for the dispose method?
I'm responsible for the using statement in C# too, but don't blame me. That's not the solution that I asked for.
That's not what I meant.
I'm not the one that
I think
asked for that.
That looks pretty good on a resume, don't you think, Mark?
Yeah, man, that's great.
I convinced Microsoft to put the dispose method in the using method in.
Well, officially that's not the case. But according to legend, that was my bitching, and the subsequent megabytes of emails of people agreeing or disagreeing on the development or .NET mailing list, that eventually yielded a solution.
That's
and
pretty
the
cool.
Solution they came up with.
So, is it a good solution?
Well, it addresses part of the problem. It addresses here's the standard protocol, which says that, but it's a much different protocol than the COM protocol.
And
COM
by protocol,
says,
you just mean a method name that's
I'm
standard.
sorry, yes. A well-known interface, a well-known method, a well-known action that every client can take on every object that has a precious resource in it.
If they want
Ask
to.
it,
Yeah.
do you have a precious resource? I'm done with you. Oh, you do? Okay,
Right.
dispose.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's the protocol.
Yep.
So, they standardized the protocol, and then after they standardized the protocol, they built in the using block to give us back that kind of C++ scope-like, this is a block, I've got this object. When we're done with this block, please also dispose this object.
Okay.
And that's what they built it for. You'll notice that Visual Basic has no such construct.
Okay. So, no such construct as what?
There's no using block in Visual Basic.
Well, there's a dispose method. That's
There
not the
is
same,
a dispose method, but you have to remember to call it, and you have to write a try-catch block.
Okay, it's the same thing, but it's just a different implementation, no?
Well,
it's more work on the VBN to get it
But
done.
it does the same thing.
it does the same thing. You write a try-catch or a try-finally block in Visual Basic,
Yeah.
and remember to ask for iDisposable and call dispose on all the objects that you've acquired.
Right.
That's the same as a bunch of using blocks in C#.
Got it.
Right, the compiler, that's just syntactic sugar for try-catch
That's
blocks
all I'm
as
saying.
far as
Yeah.
the C# compiler is concerned.
Okay, so
And
you
of
have
course,
this.
they only put it in C# because I was a C# programmer, and they knew I wouldn't complain if they didn't put it in Visual Basic.
So you should never, use your sub finalize, override finalize.
No,
Is that what you're saying?
No, that is not what I'm saying.
Okay.
You should, if you've got, like you're building a file handler, right? If you've got an object that holds on to a precious resource,
Yeah.
And by the way, most of the time you don't. Instead, what you do is you're writing objects that hold on to objects
Yeah.
that are provided by the framework that hold on to resources, right? But if you're holding, an object that's got a resource that has to go away as soon as possible, you implement the iDisposable protocol, you implement the dispose method, and you also implement the finalize method. And in C# you do that by providing a destructor.
Right.
Okay. What do you do in VB? I'm not even sure.
You actually just go up to the menu on the drop down on the right side.
It's a term function, isn't it?
The right hand side, and you override sub finalize.
Sub finalize. So you do actually implement the finalize method.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the way it should have been.
And then you can either if you want to use the dispose method, you can implement iDisposable,
or you can
just write a dispose method.
Right.
Period.
Right.
And as long as the signature is the same, it'll call it, even if you don't implement the interface.
Kind of like sub new.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I thought so myself, but it works.
Oh, wait a minute, though. But, I mean, that's not the same as asking for iDisposable and calling dispose. That's just the same as the client calling the dispose method.
Yes, but however, I believe, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I believe that just by doing that VB puts that implementation in there for you automatically.
Yeah, I believe it does. So you don't have to go as far as implementing the interface.
That's cool.
So it is in a way, but we get back to once again VB is shielding you from some of the underlying details that you might want to know.
I teach people to use the implement statement and to go up and let the code be written for them. The skeleton.
Yeah, I like that too. Now, the problem, of course, with the iDisposable protocol is somebody has to remember to call it.
Right.
And what if they don't? For example, it is a lot harder in Visual Basic to write try finally than it is in C# to use a using statement.
So you're basically telling people what we do as well, and I think you're going to say that you call the dispose from the finalize and then say suppress finalize from dispose.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you want to do is in the dispose, you want to say, don't call my finalizer, I'm all set.
Right.
By calling the suppress finalize method. But in your finalizer, if somebody forgets, which is by definition, right, that you've gotten to your finalizer, then you should go and clean up those resources.
Now, how much overhead is that going to add?
Well, if the client, this is the beauty, right? If the client is using you appropriately, none. If the client uses you badly, then that finalizer will be called someday later.
Okay, wait a sec. So just by implementing the finalizer, that's not what takes time. It's actually when it's called. And in fact, the reason it takes so long is because the garbage collector says, "Oh, this is an implementation of finalizer. We're going to put this on a background low priority thread and get to this someday." Ah.
Yeah, this is kind of like insurance in cases you've got to have it in there.
Oh, you absolutely. There are lots of cases where you absolutely have to have it in there, and in that case, you hope the client is calling dispose that your finalizer never gets needed.
That's interesting because I saw one of your guys up there at Dev Connections, Ted
Neward.
Ted Neward,
yeah, that's him.
Who was telling his audience never, ever, ever, ever implement the sub-finalize method.
Yeah, he and I have, we disagree on that.
Huh.
Not only if you implement iDisposable, you should be implementing the finalizer.
Yeah.
You should also, in your finalizer, put system.debug.assert false.
Yeah.
So that the developer can find, oh, hey, I forgot here. I blew the protocol.
Good. So when Ted says that it degrades performance, what exactly does he mean?
What he means there is now there's a bunch of memory that the garbage collector can't free until the thread the background thread gets around to calling those finalize methods.
Okay.
And that can cause performance degradation.
I see.
That's why you put the assert false in your finalizer so that the developer can notice.
So it's really only if you don't call iDispose, the dispose method, that finalizer executes.
That's right.
And that's
otherwise it never executes.
And that's what takes so much time is for that thing to go away.
Right. And the memory, the degradation in performance because of that memory that has
right,
to
but
hang
it's
around.
only right there at the end of the life of that object. It's not through the life of the object that you get a performance degradation.
No,
okay.
No, it's only at the end.
That's I'm glad you've cleared that up for me because it didn't make any sense.
Sure.
What I was
that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion, Chris.
Well, let me throw in one more interesting tidbit about iDisposable, and then I'll be done. It turns out that the code to implement the dispose method and to call suppress finalize properly and to override the finalizer and to call dispose. And you also need a little flag that says, hey, am I being called at the end of my lifetime, in which case I shouldn't be touching any of the other objects that are in me, or am I being called by the client, in which case I can go and party on those objects all I want.
Right.
That whole protocol is implemented in the base class of system.component model.component. Most of what makes a component is that it implements iDisposable and it implements the finalize, and it funnels all of those properly optimized for you to a single method call you implement called dispose that takes a single Boolean.
That's the disposing Boolean that you see in a VB form.
Absolutely.
Dispose method.
Yes, and that's all back to what is the appropriate protocol for an object that holds resources.
Great.
And components, things like timers or process monitors or whatever, right? Those all have resources, and they need to know when the form shuts down so that they can reclaim their resources.
Yep, very cool. And we'll be right back with Chris Sells on .NET Rocks. Hey, did you know that starting with the January 2003 issue of Windows Developer Magazine, Dino Esposito is going to be writing a column called Inside.NET, and that's going to look into the underused and underestimated classes and interfaces in the .NET framework, either using the CLI source or decompilers as a reference. You know, .NET provides lots of new classes for effective software development, and understanding the design rationale between each class is the key to building lean, mean apps. So this column, Inside.NET, is going to delve deep into the internals of the framework and provide practical examples to help you get the most out of .NET. And in his first column, Dino's going to review the many collection classes now available in .NET, discussing the interfaces for each class. He lists the various classes by complexity and provides a really handy set of rules to pick up the right class to contain your data. So check out Windows Developer Magazine and Dino Esposito's Inside.NET article. As far as I'm concerned, it totally rocks. So let's get back to our interview with Chris Sells, where we're talking about the dispose method and finalizers and all that great stuff right here on .NET Rocks. Stay tuned. The developers in my classes, usually it takes some time to get straight the difference between a class and a component, because they're looking at it as something they add to the project, not really what the component does. The component, and I think you said it before, but I just like to say this as many times as I can because it's a point of confusion. The component has code in there to let Visual Studio work its magic, to let it take the properties that you set in the property window and write code in the initialize component method and manage that code so that if you remove the component, it's gone. It has a rich design time interface, not necessarily a runtime interface. And it also has a container that it can contain other components. And other than that, in the disposing method, I mean, those are pretty much the highlights of what a component is. Would you have anything to add to that list?
Actually, I would put it slightly differently. Definitely the component base class implements that disposing protocol I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
So all you have to do is implement the dispose method, or not if you don't have any resources.
Right.
And then it turns out that the namespace itself has a ton of attributes that say, this is descriptions, these are the properties I want to expose to the designer, these are the properties I don't care about exposing to the designer, here's my icon, all that stuff. None of it represents code.
Right.
Right, the component itself, the component base class itself, has no code for integrating into Designer. Essentially what happens is the designer walks up to a DLL, an assembly, and says, give me a list of all your components, which is just a list of classes that derive from components.
Yeah.
And I'll throw those in the toolbox, and they can drag and drop those, and I'll use .NET Reflection to build that property browser, but the component itself doesn't have to do any of that. Now, it turns out there's all kinds of extensibility hooks if you want to do fancy things. And in fact, I'm writing an article with a friend of mine, Michael Weinhardt of Australia. He and I are writing an article about how to build a component and a control that integrates into VS.NET using all of this cool stuff.
Cool. So the focus of a component really is the design, the designer, the Visual Studio side?
It's really two things.
Yeah.
Right, that it's a class that is non-visual that you can provide this, metadata so
Right.
that a designer, not just VS.net, but a designer could consume it.
Okay.
And, of course, it's that whole resource management.
Right. With iDisposable.
Right.
Well,
Which, by the way, the designer also generates code to take advantage of.
Yes. So let's take a phone call.
Hello.
Hey,
What's going on?
who's this?
This is Rich Sabo from Atlanta, Georgia.
Hey, Rich, how you doing?
I'm better and better every day.
You got a question for Chris Sells?
Actually, I ended up with two questions I'd like to ask him. I also teach the Microsoft technologies and was working with a group that does a lot of Windows applications, and they have the mask edit control that they're using in their current applications. I was wondering if there's any way to duplicate that in the .NET world, or if you see anything coming that might help.
Good question.
So, hi, Rich.
How are you doing?
Just fine. The name sounds familiar. Where do you work?
I used to work with Mark, and you and I think, met at one of the .NET developer trainings.
Okay. So the answer to your question is multifaceted. As you probably already know, there is no masked edit control built into .NET in WinForms or any other place.
Right.
The first thing I would do is, well, let's see. Is there a budget associated with this? Are you allowed to pay for some reusable code that you might want to use?
What they've got is an application that's a pretty specific one for their industry.
But I mean, are they allowed to buy, say, a third-party component?
I don't know. They're redeveloping their whole application right now, moving it to .NET.
So I'm absolutely positive, although I can't point you at a specific vendor off the top of my head, I'm positive that one of the old-time ActiveX control guys has built a masked edit control for .NET. So that would be where I'd start. And the nice thing about commercial code is that you have somebody to complain to, and they are supposed to listen. Who knows if they actually do. The other place I'd go is I'm a big fan of Code Project, codeproject.com. They have a bunch of really great free controls, and the reason I point you at them is because I happen to know that my own kind of source available .NET application framework, Genghis, doesn't yet have a masked edit control. However, if your client builds one, which you could absolutely do by deriving from system.windows.forms.textbox and handling keystrokes and checking to make sure that they, work, then, what they should do is contribute it to Genghis, and we will get it out to the world.
Okay. Second question I had is with ADO versus ADO.NET. I know when we first started in the .NET world, really the advice was if you've got a connected server-side cursor to just go ahead and continue to use ADO. Now that we've got a couple of applications up there and running and shaking it out a little bit, is that still the overriding advice, and do you see ADO.NET increasing their support for connected operations?
So I'm not really a database guy. I play one on TV, and I know some really smart database guys, and I worked with Sean Wildemuth on his pragmatic ADO.NET. And so pretty much everything I know about ADO.NET I learned from Sean. But I don't see ADO.NET adding connected operations anytime soon.
Me either.
And I don't think that they should. The .NET part of .NET, or ADO.NET or ASP.NET, is very important. It's all about building connected applications. And connected applications perform overwhelmingly better when you're using disconnected data as opposed to connected data. The problem with connected data, of course, is you're holding locks on tables and you're holding up other clients that need those locks. And so memory is cheap. .NET was built around the idea that clients are just sitting around, client computers are just sitting around with a ton of memory, doing nothing. Might as well fire hose the data to them and let them party on it, and then let the database on the back end go and help somebody else.
All right, and that's why Hello World is 12 megabytes.
That's why, because memory is cheap.
Memory is cheap, and the
turns out
alternative
that
would suck.
The fact that it was 12 megabytes mattered. It wouldn't be 12 megabytes.
That's
And
right.
in fact, we've just come out of that. It was called DOS.
Yeah, right. I tell people to consider the alternative, of the large memory footprint, which is hundreds and hundreds of granular DLLs in the framework that we'd have to constantly be making references to. That would really suck.
So we're back to DLL hell in that case.
No, we wouldn't be back to DLL. We'd be in reference hell is what we'd be in. Add reference hell. Why doesn't this work? Oh, I forgot to add the reference to the text box text property.
Myself, one of the things that I really wish VS.NET had, and I just haven't sat down to write it yet, is that it would have IntelliSense for every single assembly on the machine.
Yeah.
And as soon as you typed in, whatever the namespace keyword is for your language, it would just go ahead automatically, silently, add the reference to your project.
So why don't you write that, Chris, and just submit it to
be a great little weekend project.
Yeah,
for you to hammer out.
What the hell do you do during the day that you can't do?
Nothing. You're right. I'm just sitting around with a lot of free time in my hands, so maybe I will.
Well, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that got me there. I appreciate it. I do a lot of teaching, so these are recurring questions at this point.
Yeah, you're a long listener to the show at this point too, aren't you, Rich?
Yeah, I've listened to most all of them at this point.
Hey, this is a very good point to bring something up, Rich and you guys, and that is that the reason why we've had a lot of callers from Atlanta recently is because people aren't taking the bait and calling us and sending us questions. And we really need those callers to email us at .NETRocks@Franklin'sNet with generic questions about .NET or questions for the next guest. Get involved, ask us, and we'll definitely get you on the air.
That's right. My long distance bill was not a lot last month. I want to kick it up, man.
We're not spending enough money. Well,
Good
thanks,
enough,
Rich.
All right. Well, thanks for the call, Rich.
All right.
Talk
to you guys later.
Rich.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So why Sells Brothers?
Good question. Actually, the Sells Brothers are the reason that I don't work pretty much 24 hours a day. I do have a brother, but he is about 10 years older than I, and he's the only electrical engineer on the planet who doesn't actually like computers.
Okay.
He's a power engineer guy.
And you wanted to freely admit this on .NET Rocks?
That I have a brother that doesn't like computers?
Well, you're giving away the secret here,
That?
Well, the secret that you're deceiving the public with the
Actually, I'm not.
The Sells Brothers.
No. The Sells Brothers company and website is not named after me and my brother.
I see.
It's named after my two sons.
Oh, very clever.
Oh, yeah.
You
See, I was picturing like the Walton family, a bunch of brothers.
abunchofguys.com.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny too because I don't know if you guys have seen the logo lately, but it bears some passing resemblance at a certain unfortunate picture I took had taken a number of years ago with me and a laptop and little else. And
please, for the love of God, keep that off the net.
But my boys both have Sells Brothers T-shirts in their size, and they love to tell their friends how this is my daddy naked.
Great. I don't think I would want to do that, Mark. I would scare people to death, I think.
No, I don't think we need to do that. We don't quite have the Adonis build that, would be good for that.
Actually, it was funny. I was 50 pounds heavier when I had that picture taken than I am now.
So since you found .NET, everything is lean and mean.
Actually, I've noticed that since the bubble burst, me and a lot of my friends have gotten thinner. I think it's just that we don't have as much money.
Also, you're probably spending less time writing code now. You have more time to go to the gym.
Yeah, you'd think that was true, except for that's not true. I find I have to work twice as hard.
So tell me about Genghis. You mentioned that to Rich a little bit. Sounds like a website. Why don't you tell us about it?
So the website is genghisgroup.com, and it turns out that there are two spellings of Genghis, very popular. You can find books on Amazon for both spellings. So the first big debate we had was after we decided to call it Genghis, which was what was the spelling. So it's GENGHIS group.com.
What is it?
So Genghis is a source available library built on top of WinForms and .NET. The idea is, as much as I don't miss MFC because it was built before the C++ compiler was complete, I do miss a lot of the wonderful features that Mike Blazak and his team built into MFC, like command handling, to be able to say, this menu and this toolbar both have the same command. I want to implement it once, not implement it one place and forward it to another. Or the idea of document handling, right? This is a view on a document, and when the data is dirty, I want to tell the underlying data model. And when I close the last view, I want somebody to automatically notice and ask the user, would they like to save?
Now,
There's all kinds of these wonderful features that people need in building real applications.
Do you suppose these will be rolled into .NET at some time in the future?
I imagine some of them will. The ideas are too good not to. Too many people want them. Microsoft listens. They'll definitely build it into
you just
future.
Said,
some of them.
You just said something that's very true, and that's Microsoft listens. Pat Hine defines the year 2000 and beyond as the age where Microsoft wants to prove to the world that they play well with others, and they are listening. And if you are a developer and you have that sort of cynical, they're Microsoft, they can do anything attitude, they really did a 180, didn't they? I mean, it's apparent with .NET, where they learned so much from Java and from other technologies that, you teach this to guys who've done Java and they look at VB.NET or C# and they're like, it's just like Java. And you're like, well, that's a good thing. They took the best parts of these different systems. They're looking and it seems like maybe for the first time, they're really stretching out to see what works out there and learning from the mistakes of other platforms and listening.
Well, it doesn't hurt, too, that, after the burst that Microsoft has been on a giant hiring binge, hiring everyone that's ever invented anything interesting.
Right.
But definitely, Microsoft has always been about, well, not always, but certainly, what interesting things are out there that our customers want.
Right.
And, it's not all altruistic. I mean, they noticed
not.
that there were real benefits in Java, and people were using Java, and they didn't want people to use Java. They wanted people to use Microsoft.
Yep.
And so they did Java 1 better, and they implemented .NET.
And it's just amazing that their model seems to be not how can we outmarket Java, how can we out-litigate our competitors, but, how can we make a better product so that people will use it? That's
absolutely what they do. I mean, technically, .NET is fabulous.
It's awesome.
It really is.
It rocks, as a matter of fact.
Agreed.
Yeah, so Chris, you're not going to work for Microsoft anytime soon, are you?
Well, I'm trying to hold out. I've literally counted like a dozen of my friends that have gone to Microsoft over the last, 5-6 months. And, the undertow is growing. But so far I've been able to hold out.
So as you can probably tell by now, MSDN Magazine is our major sponsor at .NET Rocks, but we still want other sponsors. If you're interested in being a sponsor, blast us off an email at .NETRocks@franklins.net, or you can send it directly to me, Carl@franklins.net. We'd love to talk to you about it. Hey, listen, I'm writing my first article for MSDN Magazine coming up here, and no surprise, what a great mag it is. This article is sort of an overview of Visual Studio 2003, which prior to the end of November was codenamed Everett. Now it's official, Visual Studio 2003. And Chris Sells is actually writing an article for that same issue, concentrating on Windows Forms in Everett. But anyway, now let's get back to the conversation. More with Chris Sells from Developmentor and sellsbrothers.com right here on .NET Rocks. Hey, don't you go away. On the phone with us now from Westfield, Mass. is Ron. Ron, you got a question for Chris?
Yes, actually, I had a couple of them. One of the questions was I had a very simple app that I put together in .NET, VB.NET, that reads in some EDI data and parses it out into a rich text box, and did it on the local machine at home, brought it into work, and threw it on the server, which I have full rights to everything in this directory and on this particular server. And all of a sudden it starts spitting up security violations, and I'm like, the old story, well, it worked at home, what's going on here? And I said, well, the only difference is it's on the LAN here, brought it to the local workstation, all of a sudden it started working. and it was rather disconcerting. Like, what's going on here?
That's a great question, Ron. What you're running into is actually not a bug, but a feature in .NET. And the particular feature is called Code Access Security. And in .NET, unlike in Windows itself, Windows, every hunk of code has the permissions of the guy running the code, which means, of course, for 98% of the Windows users on the planet, every hunk of code running, no matter where it comes from, has administrative privileges. Right? Do you guys run administrative when you're at your workstations?
Yeah, well, at least in the IT department and the user community.
Yeah, you do.
Though,
but Carl, Mark, do you guys run as administrators?
Yeah, when I'm developing, I do.
Everyone does. My grandmother runs as administrator, which means that wherever that code comes from, it will, if it's allowed to run at all, have full administrative rights. And so in .NET, they decided to turn that off. What they did was they implemented a system based on what we know about this code. Generally, it's where it comes from.
In
Does
version
it come from
1.
a local computer? Aha, it can do anything. Does it come from the LAN? Oh, the LAN actually is a partially trusted place. We give it a lot of permissions, but not full trust the way we do on the local machine. And of course, you can extend that to the internet. And the internet, by default, as of Service Pack 1 in .NET 1.0, says we don't trust code from the internet at all.
That makes sense.
So actually, it was a problem because you weren't familiar with it, but that's a whole new security model, and we like it.
Yeah, what happened in my case is that the application loaded, and then when I tried to do a file open, it brought up the file open dialog.
Well, that makes sense.
And as soon as it went to do that, it threw up the security violation.
Okay, so in the intranet case, you are allowed to show both the file open and the file save dialogues, but you're not allowed to know the name of the file. And instead, both of those dialog box components provide methods called open file, that whatever the user picked, it'll just give you an open stream and say, here you go.
So, Chris, if you're the average VB.NET developer out there, and like we were saying, you are in administrative mode when you're writing your code, what are some things that you need to look at to get your app running when you distribute it?
So that's an interesting point. The vast majority, the world is kind of right now broken up into two styles of applications. The kind of applications that are installed with a setup.exe or an MSI on a client's machine, in which case it'll be installed on the local machine and it has full trust. Or the style of application, which is really a website where you surf to an URL and everything is hosted by the browser. .NET enabled a middle ground. .NET allows you to put an exe on your web server and surf to it like an URL. And it will be downloaded and executed on demand with the permissions from wherever that came. So you have the middle ground where you can actually execute an executable across the internet, make sure you always have the current version, and in fact .NET assemblies are so small, they're about the size of web pages.
On the disk, anyway.
Yeah. On the disk, they're very small, so downloading them is like downloading an average web page. Or
just slightly bigger than the source, actually.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do a really good job. So what you can do is you can have it always up to date. Whenever you want to release a new version, of HR 452.exe, you update the web server, all the clients the next day surf to that exe, and it downloads and executes on their machine, just like it was a standalone Windows application. So you get the beauty of the distribution, but the rich UI of a standalone Windows app.
Yeah, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah, what we had done in our particular case is most of our current VB6 applications are loaded on the server, and the users execute them from there. Of course, they're actually installed.
So you're using the LAN as your distribution mechanism as opposed to a web server.
Right. With the idea with .NET where you can easily replace it this way, that they're taking it right from the server, and then if it has to be replaced, it's in one place.
Sure.
And in this particular case, I was running with full administrator privileges on my machine.
Now remember, Code Access Security is not .NET security. Code Access Security is different. It's another layer of security, another model of security, built on top of .NET Security. So you could run with full administrator privileges all day long. But the feature, remember, keep telling yourself this is a feature. The feature of Code Access Security is that it doesn't award privileges based on who is running the code. It awards privileges based on where that code came from. And by default, unless you change it, if code comes from the intranet, it has fewer permissions than if it comes from the local machine.
Right.
So what does he need to do to fix this on his clients?
Well, assuming he considers this a bug to be fixed, what happens is that each client has to be given something called a code group. So some administration has to happen, and that administration can happen via using tools that ships with the .NET framework, or the administration can happen via an MSI file that creates the appropriate entries in the appropriate database. But essentially what has to happen is a code group needs to be created, a custom one that says, by the way, if we get an assembly from IT Web, or whatever the name of your internal website is, or internal server where you're hosting your stuff, if it comes from there, party on. Give it full trust. And in fact, you should see later this week an article for my Wonders of WinForms column that talks all about what the security model is and how to increase permissions so you can have full permissions on your apps.
You can do that with the administrative tool, the .NET Security Wizard.
Yes, you can do it with the wizard. You can say trust and assembly. It's kind of a pain for users to use.
Or trust the whole machine for that zone. You can also apply it to just the machine that increase the security for that.
You can go to the machine and say, I have full trust for everything from the intranet.
Yeah.
I would recommend that you don't do a similar thing for the internet.
Yes. That would be dumb.
Yes.
It would be a bad thing.
You're going to surf to I'mGonna-F-up-your-computer.com. Yeah.
Yes.
So what would happen? I'd have to go and address this on every workstation, or is there a centralized way that I could?
Let me answer that. If there was an easy way for you to touch all those computers and increase the trust of the security, it wouldn't be a very good security model. Right? Because if there was just one script that you could just send to all these computers and
no one would have to be involved, and
no
it
one
would
have
just
to be
happen
involved
automatically, that's not much of a security model.
That would really suck.
Yeah.
So that's the deal, is that you do have to touch every one of these machines in some way by an administrator.
Now, but you can certainly simplify things. For example,
Yes.
you can write an MSI, and I give the skeleton for an MSI
Which is
in my
a
article.
Microsoft's installer module.
Yes, thank you. Microsoft Setup Information.
I'm the acronym police here. Just
Yes,
remember.
Microsoft Setup Information, I believe, is the expansion of that acronym.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a setup.exe that would run the managed code that would add the code group that says if it comes from there, it has full trust. And then once they do that, they only have to do it once. And then from then on, anytime they run an application or an assembly from there, whether it's an exe or a DLL that's loaded, it will have full trust.
And they have to be logged on as an administrator when they run that?
They need to be logged on as administrator when they run the awarding the permission.
But the good news is they don't have to go into any wizards and mess around with settings.
That's right. You can just write, you can distribute that MSI file right alongside of all the exes and just tell them, click here first.
That rocks.
Now, that's one way to do it. There are like things like SMS and Active Directory where you can drop, MSI files in and they will magically be executed on each machine. But I've never actually seen a network administered so well that actually worked.
You mean like using a group policy to install software when someone logs in?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that too.
Could you also do this if your organization hasn't rolled out the .NET framework to every workstation? Would a good approach be to have the .NET framework installed in the image that they're going to put out to all these machines?
Oh, yeah.
Set up so that it trusts the intranet?
You could absolutely do that. It turns out that when you make changes to that security policy, it's just a text file in the right directory. And if you wanted to preload the text file in the right directory from the image where everyone gets .NET, then they'll all have the right permissions.
What that file is restricted to only administrators.
Right, but if it's in the image, then whatever
Right.
machine that the image is rolled out to.
Exactly.
And in fact, you could use the administrative tools or write code that would mess with the text file. And then, the keys would already be in there. You don't even have to enter them with Notepad.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So does that answer your question, Ron?
Oh, yes, it does. That answers a lot of questions.
Just remember, it's a feature, not a bug.
Right. And it definitely shouldn't discourage you from doing rich Windows applications in a distributed way. I see more and more companies going towards this. In fact, I've been involved with a project here in New England with Microsoft Consulting Services that I've trained over almost 100 developers for this project, and from different consulting companies. Huge project, and they recycle developers through this process. There's like 5 or 6 teams that are working on different pieces of it. The first version was sort of like, just getting what we already had working in ASP.NET, and then the second one was an ASP.NET full-blown application, and then they found that the performance was really bad because all the data kept having to go back to the web browser back and forth, and a lot of overhead with HTML and keeping things stateful. And they decided to scrap that and go with a Windows Forms distributed smart client.
There has been a lot of pushback against the thin client idea, especially since .NET came, and you can get the best of both.
Yeah. And you throw remoting in the middle, and you got a serious.
Or web services, or Award Full Trust, and you
Yep.
can talk to the database directly. There's all kinds of things you can do.
Yep. Serious platform. All right. Well, thanks for calling, Ron.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Good night now.
Good night.
By the way, I just wanted to make one note. I mean, the reason that code access security is so important in .NET is because there was a huge problem when you're building component-based applications, that those components could come from who knows where. And unless you're allowed to, on a per assembly basis, award permissions, you have to go back to the NT model that says you can only change permissions on a per process basis.
Yeah.
And of course, that doesn't work with lots of little components. They all have to be in the same process for there to be performance. So code access security is really about having security and performance in the same place.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, Chris, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, wait, I've got a really tough question for Chris before he gets off the phone.
Okay.
Chris, I know you've worked on an O'Reilly book. How the heck did they figure out what animals to put on the cover?
That's funny. The very first question that I asked when I got an O'Reilly editor's attention was, how do I pick my animal? And he said, you don't. The authors do not get to pick animals. In fact, they don't even get to really influence the animals. What happens is they have a secret group of artist-like people. And what you do is you say, this is a little bit about what the book is about, but of course you're describing it to artists, right? So you can't get too technical.
Right.
And then out of that group, boom, they say, this is your animal. And that's it. There is no way around it. So the only two things I can tell you besides that. One is all the .NET books are about water creatures of some kind or another, because .NET will be covering the world like the oceans. And
it'll be drowning the developers in information.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Hopefully it'll be covering the world like the oceans in a good way.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I have heard legend of a friend of mine, the only developer that I ever knew who was able to actually pick his own animal. And his name is Peter Drayton, and he's written several
He must be an artist.
What's that? He
must be an artist.
No, but he had such a compelling argument that they couldn't turn him away.
Wow.
Yeah, we actually met Peter at VS Connections, I think, didn't we, Carl?
Oh, that's right. Peter Drayton.
Yeah.
Peter Drayton, he's the greatest. He just went to work for Microsoft. He's another of my friends.
Very cool. Is there no end to your A-list?
No. So apparently the way he was able to convince them was he was writing a book about C#, the successor to Java in many ways.
Yes.
So he went to them and said, there is this species of dog that has been extinct on the island of Java. And there is this the next species of dog which has replaced it. And that's the animal I need on my cover.
Very good.
And they couldn't argue with him.
That's too good.
That's a great story. Well, I for one am glad to know, how that process works. I guess we don't know exactly how it works internally, but I always thought that the guys that wrote these books were just, coming up with some random animal to throw on the cover.
There's always a story. If you ask the author, he will always tell you why the artist picked that book, because you do get a little explanation, maybe a sentence.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, you write for MSDN Magazine, do you not?
I do.
Do you write for other magazines besides them?
I have recently written an article with a colleague for Windows Developer Magazine. Actually,
Okay.
with two colleagues. But other than that, for a long time, I haven't really written for any other magazine besides MSDN.
How before MSDN was MSDN, it was Microsoft Systems Journal.
Yeah,
Were you
MSDN.
reading it back then, too?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
For years and years.
It's a great magazine.
It's a fabulous magazine.
What do you got coming up in that mag?
So we were just, Kirk Farida and I, Kirk is another colleague at Developmentor. He is rewriting ATL internals for the second edition for ATL 7 in VS.NET.
Very good.
And he and I co-wrote an article about using ATL 7 to build web services. Right? What do you do if you want to build a web service in an unmanaged environment?
Okay.
There's all kinds of good reasons to do that.
Cool.
So that one just came out, and I've already mentioned the article I'm co-authoring about doing components and controls and integrating them appropriately into VS.NET in the system.component model namespace.
Mm-hmm.
And this week I'm actually finishing up an article on what's new in WinForms for Everett for .NET 1.1.
Yeah. What are some of the other articles of notable consequence that you want to mention that you have written for past issues of MSDN Magazine?
Well, probably the one that has had the most impact and caused the most trouble, and the one I spent probably the longest understanding and executing on, is the one where I talk about that whole WinForms distribution model in .NET. It's called various things. It's called Smart Clients. It's called hrefxes. It's called Mobile Code. Mm-hmm. It's such a new feature. The community hasn't even decided on the right name for it yet. But it's the idea that you can execute an exe on a web server like it was an URL, and it'll be downloaded and executed on the fly for you.
Do you also write? Do you also write for MSDN Online?
Yes, I'm a columnist. I write the Wonders of WinForms column for MSDN Online.
Cool. So, what is that well received? That website, MSDN Online?
I've gotten actually more email from that than I ever have from the printed articles.
Wow, lots of good stuff, and that's free for anybody.
Yeah, help yourself. It's at msdn.microsoft.com/columns, and there's a bunch of great columns on there that I surf it regularly myself and read. Yeah,
I know Billy Hollis and Rockford Locke do a column there.
They do.
Yeah, they do Adventures in VB.net, I think.
That's great. Well, it's a great magazine. I'm beginning to write for it myself, and I've heard nothing but good stuff about it. And I've been reading it for years, of course, and heard nothing but good stuff about writing for it. One thing I don't like about other magazines I've written for is they tend to edit out all your good jokes, and that really drives me crazy.
That's interesting, too, because I have had many style battles with almost every editor at every magazine, including MSDN Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
But I've fought very hard. In my opinion, an article isn't, even as cool as it is, as great as it is, as much as it tells you about the technology details you need that minute, unless it also happens to be compelling and somewhat entertaining,
yes,
people will never read it.
Yep.
And I feel very strongly about that. So everything I write has an element of lightheartedness, of entertainment, of, just unabashedly making fun of whatever, just so I can keep people's attention. And when editors try to edit that out, I don't like it.
Yeah, I went through the roof on another popular magazine that I had an introductory paragraph to a new technology article that was just awesome. It was good writing, I thought, and other people did too. And they took the whole thing out, axed it. Really made me mad.
Yeah. In fact, it's almost always the first two paragraphs that, one, I consider the most
important.
Yeah. And two, that Microsoft almost invariably throws away. And so I always have to fight to get in the back end.
But it's so true, though. I mean, you can tell what it's going to be about by the freaking headline.
Yeah, you got to lay a foundation.
In the table of contents, there's a little description of what it's about. They know what it's about. Now they want to sit down, with a smoke or a beer or whatever it is and check it out.
Yeah, I often drink beer when I read complicated technical articles. I find that helps me digest them a little bit.
You haven't been talking to Tim Huckabee, have you?
My understanding is Visual Basic guys like to be halfway through their first six-pack before they pick up.
Oh, that's technical. A low blow. You don't even want to hear what we say about C# guys.
Oh, feel free. I love to hear those.
How's your hair looking these days?
It's okay.
He doesn't know. That's okay.
Yeah, we often joke about the cleanliness of C# programmers.
Well, C++ required a lot of concentration, and it was very easy to lose track of time, and the fact that you stink.
That's true. So you can tell a C++ programmer because their hair is greasy because they don't have time to bathe.
That's totally, absolutely.
Yes, body odor is a badge of honor. The
C#
guy's good.
Java, C# and Java programmers can bathe, once every other day.
That's right, because there's a little bit of time.
There's a little bit of time that they have. And VB programmers always have nice fluffy hair because they get to bathe every morning.
Yeah, because they don't roll out of bed till about 10. They take off for the golf course around 3. And plus, they didn't have to worry about getting that whole degree before they showed up for work in the first place.
Hey, man, do you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Well, I have this little phrase on my website that I think really sums up what I think is important, and it's think deeply and code well. Very
good. Well said. Thank you very much, and we'll stop back again, won't you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, man, it's been a great talk, Chris. Thoroughly enjoyed it tonight.
My pleasure.
Thanks for educating us, and we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. Good night.